Okay. Welcome to the new series, the Elul Customs and Conventions. And we're going to start off today with a widely known custom, the notion that the shofar is sounded every single day of the month of Elul. I will begin today's class by reading to you from the Kitzur Shulchan Aruch, from the concise code of Jewish law. Everybody knows this. Basic stuff. Chapter 125 in Kitzur Shulchan Aruch, the second paragraph of the chapter, Noyagin litkoa shofar b'chodesh zeh. It's customary to sound the shofar during this month. Umatchilin b'yom beis Rosh Chodesh. We begin on the second day of Rosh Chodesh, which is actually the first day of Elul. V'token b'chol yom la'achar tfilat shachrit. And we sound the shofar every day after morning prayers. We do it at Tkiya, that's the straight blast, the Shvarim, the broken blast, and the Truah, which is the blast that's broken in many pieces. And then we conclude again with a Tkiya with one long blast. And we do this with the exception of Erev Rosh Hashanah, and the reason that we don't do it, Kitzur Shulchan Aruch says, is mafsikim by, we make an interruption between the Tkiyas of Rishus, between the shofar sounding, which is only an elective, and between Tkiyas Mitzvah, the sounding of the shofar, which is actually something we're obligated to do. Right? You would call a mitzvah obligation or mitzvah mandate. Why do we do this? The reason that we blow the shofar during this month, if it's not a mitzvah, it's only a custom. Where did the custom come from? Says the Kitzur Shulchan Aruch, we do this in order to inspire or to rouse everybody to tshuva, to return to Hashem. That is the nature of the shofar. La'orer, the shofar awakens. Ulahachrid, the shofar frightens. As the scripture states, and this is directly from Amos, where Amos in the third chapter asks many proverbial questions, and one of his proverbial questions there is, Hayitoka shofar be'ir va'om le'yecharadu. A shofar will sound, as Radak explains, not a pre-planned shofar, because Radak says there's sometimes shofar which is planned for a wedding or something else. That doesn't make anybody frightened. But when there's a shofar blast that comes out of nowhere, if it would happen in the city, would people not tremble? So, it seems people would tremble. And that's the end. So, my question, for starters, is where does this come from? Where does it come from? When did we start doing this? 100 years ago? 200 years ago? 500 years ago? 1,000 years ago? Did they do it at the time of the Beit HaMikdash? When was the first time that they blew the shofar during the month of Elul? I mean, maybe we should be giving Mishloach Manot for a month before Purim. Just to get into the good spirit of friendship. Maybe we should light the menorah for like a month before Hanukkah, just to get into lighting menorahs. Should we eat matzah for a month before Pesach? Actually, we don't eat matzah for a month before Pesach because we're not allowed to eat, or not supposed to eat matzah before Pesach. Many have a custom to avoid matzah all month long so that when the night of Pesach comes, you can actually eat it with gusto. That's not so simple, to eat matzah with gusto. You have to not eat it for a month before and then starve yourself on Erev Pesach. And then maybe you can eat matzah with gusto. Wouldn't the shofar be more frightening if we would hear it only twice a year? Wouldn't the shofar really shake us up if you came to shul and you hadn't heard it since last year or since the end of Yom Kippur the year before, and then you hear that jarring sound? But instead, you're hearing it for a month long, so you get used to it. Rabbeinu David Kimchi, Radak himself on the pasuk in Amos, which is in chapter 3, verse 6, he says, so Radak says, well, I mean, after all, there are pa'omim rabbis, there are many times that the shofar gets blown, the people don't tremble, they don't get frightened. For example, a simcha, the shofar is sounded sometimes for joy. L'shirim, it could be part of some kind of ensemble. Or lahake la'am, it could just be a way to gather the people together. It's just a call. So it doesn't necessarily have to shake you up. So he says, well, it's below zmane. He says, if you look in the Targum, you see Targum Yonasan ben Azil says, Im yutaka shofara bekarta below zimne. If the shofar comes unplanned shofars, they freak people out. You hear a shofar in the middle of nowhere, that shakes you up. All right, so in that case, it will be a really good idea for us not to blow the shofar, with the exception of Rosh Hashanah. You see that the Kitzur Shulchan Aruch himself says that you have to make an interruption between the tkiyot of Reshut, between elective tkiyot, and between the mitzvah tkiyot. Why would we be appropriating a mitzvah from the Torah and turning it into a custom? I challenge you to find anything else in Judaism that we do for a month before. Okay, obviously, fasting for Yom Kippur would not be a good idea. But there are lots of things we do. We don't even eat. Sfirat Omer is a mitzvah to do every day for 7 weeks. We don't even eat cheese blintzes, a whole Sfirat Omer, to get ready for Shavuot when we have a Shavuot delicacy.
You could if you wanted.
Of course you could if you wanted, but then you wouldn't appreciate it on Shavuot. So therefore, don't eat cheesecake. Then you eat cheesecake on Shavuot, and forget about it. It's so wonderful, right? That's what makes it special. I'm asking you a real question. I mean, there's a custom of eating dried fruits only because we don't really get fruit in the ancient world during the winter. The only way to have fruit was to have dried fruit, but there's still a custom that remains to eat dried fruit on Chamisha Asar B'Shvat, on the 15th day of Shvat. We don't eat dried fruit for a week before, a day before, a month before. There's a minhag, there's a custom of eating it on the day of. Show me one other mitzvah or even another custom which is done outside of its proper time, of its ordained time, other than the sounding of the shofar. Who came up with this idea? It could be argued, and I will argue tonight, that it diminishes the impact instead of expands the impact. The nature is we, as human beings, are creatures of comfort, and we get comfortable with things.
Is it possible that the purpose of it during Elul is in order to raise awareness for tshuva in preparation for?
It is of course possible.
In other words, to raise awareness
that Rosh Hashanah is coming.
That it's time for tshuva. Here we go.
Clearly, it's clearly that would be the reason. I mean, the Kitzur Shulchan Aruch says that himself. La'ores ha'am l'tshuva. It's to awaken the nation to tshuva. I'm asking though, wouldn't it be wiser to find some other way to awaken the people to tshuva and to maximize the impact of the Rosh Hashanah shofar, which is actually a biblical mitzvah, instead of minimizing its impact? I understand this is not an absolute question. It's just to kind of get the juices flowing here. Yes?
A few things. Firstly, I think it'd be interesting to note that in the context that's mentioned in Amos, it actually is in regards to war. Like I think you mentioned in, was it Yechezkel? That they would blow a shofar for times of war.
Okay, so since you're mentioning times of war, I'm going to share with you that Rashi says that this refers to the sentry, the city sentry, or the watch person, the tzofa, who is watching to see if there's going to be an attack on the city. The tokea b'shofar, he blows the shofar, he sounds the horn, and it's because he's trying to wake the people up. He says, okay, we have to muster, we're under attack. Yeah, so there is an element of that. But once again, if this would not be a biblical mitzvah, and we need to muster the people and rouse them and wake them, okay, I get it. But if it's a biblical mitzvah to do on Rosh Hashanah, to expropriate that mitzvah and to create a custom that people become accustomed to it, seems to vastly diminish the impact rather than maximize the impact of the shofar.
And that brings me to my second question.
Okay.
You mentioned earlier that in the case of Simchot or Shabbos, that's another example.
Not Shabbos.
Okay, yeah, not Shabbos. That is not an example. But in the case of Simchos, we blow the shofar and kind of expect it. Isn't that the same thing on Rosh Hashanah? We are all expecting when the shofar is. In fact, we see it written into our own Sidurim. In fact, it's even blown in a similar context of a simcha, because we're crowning Hashem as our king.
That's a good point.
When we crown kings, we blow a shofar.
That's a good point. You're saying that the shofar blowing is kind of anticipated.
Yeah.
It's expected. Okay. So but it's going to be expected all the days of Elul then. Only going to be more expected.
Yeah.
It's going to be less effective, not more effective. So, and how did this get so widely accepted? Like everybody does this.
Where did it start
Just
from?
that, where did it start from? Where did it start from? So I did not know the answer to that question this morning. So I went on a journey. I said, I got to find out the answer, because this just doesn't seem to make any sense. And my discovery took me all the way back, and I kid you not, more than 2,000 years. More than 2,000 years. The first time it's actually documented. However, then I realized it's not 2,000 years. The first time a shofar was blown on Rosh Chodesh Elul, get this, 3,331 years ago. Rosh Chodesh Elul. The first time a shofar was blown Rosh Chodesh Elul was 3,331 years ago, and it is possible that it's been blown that way ever since. It's conceivable that we've been doing this for literally over 3 millennia. That's way older than most of the world's faith systems.
What's the context?
What's the context? Okay. So the context is a collection of teachings from the great Rabbi Eliezer HaGadol, the sage who inspired and taught Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Eliezer HaGadol, also known as Rabbi Eliezer ben Hyrcanus, a remarkable person from every stretch of imagination. He grew up a very wealthy boy, very spoiled, wealthy boy living in Yerushalayim, to a father who hated religion, especially his own religion, hated Yiddishkeit, hated the sages, and he wanted nothing to do with them. And he made sure to raise his child as a good secular Jerusalemite. Poor father. The boy started looking. He began to yearn and look, and eventually he went to the yeshiva of Rabbeinu Yochanan ben Zakkai. And in Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai's yeshiva, he had no food. He was ashamed to tell anybody. And this rich boy who had a silver spoon in his mouth, from the day he was born, didn't have food. But he didn't tell anybody. And he studied Torah. And at some point, a terrible smell began to come from his mouth and from his nostrils because he was chewing on earth, on soil to stay alive. And they noticed this after several days, and the Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai said, find out what's with this guy. He's a terrible stench. And they found out that he was actually chewing on soil to keep himself alive. Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai was the de facto leader of the Jewish people. Almost 2,000 years ago, when the Beis Hamikdash was destroyed, adopts Rabbi Eliezer HaGadol, and from then on he eats at Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai's table. And he becomes one of the great sages. And he has a student whose name is Akiva. Right? So this is who Rabbi... Now, Rabbi Eliezer HaGadol, he compiled his own little book of what you would call medrash. It's called Pirkei de Rabbi Eliezer. And there are certain medrashim which are found in the teachings or chapters of Rabbi Eliezer that are not found anywhere else. Anywhere else in Torah. Now, Rabbi Eliezer doesn't make this up. This is the teachings Rabbi Eliezer received from his teachers, and he redacted it in this book called Pirkei de Rabbi Eliezer. It's a thin volume. In the 46th chapter, a narrative begins to be told. It's a narrative about the Jewish people. It's a narrative about, it's attributed to teachings that begin with Rabbi Eliezer ben Azariah and teachings that he gave about the receiving of the Torah and the subsequent events that followed. Well, everybody knows what happened after the Torah got given. Everybody's very happy. They ate cheesecake. And then? then they built the golden calf. That was terrible. Okay, so this wasn't good. Moshe Rabbeinu had to come down and destroy the golden calf, and now he had to rehabilitate the Jewish people and get God back on their side. So, I'm reading to you from the Pirkei de Rabbi Eliezer. Uberesh Chodesh Elul. It was on Rosh Chodesh Elul. Omar HaKadosh Baruch Hu Moshe. God said to Moses, Alei Elai Hahara. Come to me. Come back to me. Come up the mountain. And Rabbi Eliezer says, V'ha'aviru shofar b'chol machana. Make sure that the sound of a shofar is heard throughout the camp. Now, I don't know where this verse actually shows up. I didn't manage to find it today. I'm not so sure this actually is a verse. I think that it's Rabbi Eliezer ben Hyrcanus kind of paraphrasing what happened. But he has an oral tradition that what happened is a shofar was blown. Okay, it's Rosh Chodesh Elul. Moshe Rabbeinu is going back up the mountain, and the day he goes back up the mountain, what happens in the camp of the Israelites? They blow the shofar. So the first time the shofar gets blown in Elul is 3,331 years ago. Well, not yet. It'll be this Monday will be the 3,331st anniversary or Sunday on Rosh Chodesh. Shaharei Moshe Allah Lahar. Moshe went up the mountain. So what's the problem? Well, Moshe Rabbeinu had a little bit of anxiety going back up the mountain and leaving the people. You know what that was about, right? Because he was going to go up the mountain, and last time he went up the mountain, it didn't work out so well. What went wrong? They miscalculated because they started counting when they decided to count instead of when they were supposed to start counting. So Moshe Rabbeinu says, now we're going to sound the shofar. Okay, everybody? Here is the horn. You count from now. Countdown begins now. They shouldn't make any foolish mistakes again. Don't run after any golden calves. Don't make any more. Elsewhere it says Avodah Zara. And God was proverbially elevated on that day with that shofar blast. So it wasn't just a warning of a shofar blast, it was also, so to speak, a way in which we were elevated. Or Hashem himself was proverbially elevated on this day. As it says in the 47th Psalm, where David HaMelech tells us from the Tillim, which was actually composed by the children of Korach. who were there on this day, who could have seen it themselves, whatever that means, that they, in that chapter of Tillim, that the children of Korah composed these Tillims, these chapters of Tillim, to the best of our knowledge, when they were somewhere between heaven and hell, or in this high place that in which they spent 38 years till they reappeared at the end of their sojourn of 40 years. At any rate, in their 47th Psalm, which we happen to recite 7 times before we blow the shofar on Rosh Hashanah, it says, Allah Elikim Bisrua Hashem B'Kol Shofar. God goes up in the shofar blast, Hashem with the sound of the shofar. By the way, the Medrash explains that the God goes from the chair, proverbially, obviously anthropomorphism, from the chair of judgment to the chair of mercy. That's Allah Elikim, comes from Elikim becomes Hashem. And Rabbi Eliezer HaGadol finishes off his narrative, and he says, Ve'al Kain, and therefore, Hiskinu Chachamim, the sages ordained, Sheyiyu Teikim B'Shofar B'Rosh Chodesh Elul B'Chol Shana V'Shana. Our sages ordained they should blow the shofar on Rosh Chodesh Elul every single year. Wow.
But Rabbi, that wouldn't mean that was from the days of Moshe Rabbeinu. Does it have to be that he was mitaking it?
It does not have to be that Moshe Rabbeinu was mitaking it. It could be that sages at a later time ordained it. It would make sense to say it was sages who very vividly remembered this event.
Well, it could have been maybe later.
Maybe it's not 3,300 years. Maybe it's 3,100 years. Maybe it's 2,500 years. I don't know. I can't answer that question with any kind of integrity or any kind of certainty. But we could argue that Chachamim did this b'chol shana v'shana, every single year, because it says b'chol shana, every year. It could be this was a great event. Now of course, 40 days later, when Moshe Rabbeinu came down, he had good news for us, and the good news was, in 2 words, Salachti kidvarecha. God said to Moshe, I have forgiven the Jewish people as per your words. So this began a wonderful period of reconciliation with God. We were on the outs. God said, I'll destroy this people. I don't want them anymore. Moshe Rabbeinu pled the case, and God said, Salachti kidvarecha. When did that begin? Rosh Chodesh Elul. You know that the notion of Yom Kippur being a day of atonement for the Jewish people, Yom Kippur is a Jewish holiday. Rosh Hashanah has a non-Jewish element to it. Adam and Eve were not Jewish. Adam and Chava were human beings created in God's image, as are all human beings, and each and every single year, God judges all of humanity, not just Jewish people. In fact, there was a very interesting story I once heard from Rabbi Krinsky that there was a New York Times writer named Ari Goldman who showed up with an African-American woman as his photographer for the New York Times. And they wanted to just get something from the Rebbe about Rosh Hashanah for the New York Times. And the Rebbe was leaving his house to go to the Ohel, to the previous Rebbe's resting site, and they stood in the back alley, and on the way into the car, Ari Goldman approached the Rebbe, and he said a few words, and this lady, who for some reason, I think her name was Virginia, but I don't know if I could be confusing that with something else, she took the pictures, and this later article appeared in the New York Times. So the Rebbe turns around to her and tells her, Happy New Year. It's Rosh Hashanah coming up. About 3 blocks into the ride to the Ohel, the Rebbe turns to Rabbi Krinsky and he says, Do you have your cell phone? Those days, cell phones were like a shoebox. He says, Do you have your cell phone? Rabbi Krinsky says, yes. So the Rebbe says, Do you have Ari Goldman's cell phone number? He says, yes. The Rebbe says, Please call him and tell him to tell the photographer that I wasn't making a joke. When I wished her a Happy New Year, I was serious. It's a new year for her also. It's for her also. So Rosh Hashanah is a new year for all of humanity. But Yom Kippur is a day that has only a Jewish flavor. This is Salachti Kedveracha. This is when God forgave the Jewish people. So we commemorate Yom HaKippurim, the day of Slicha, is a historic day in which God forgave us. When did God forgive us the first time? On the first Yom Kippur. The first Yom Kippur after we got the Torah. 40 days after Moshe Rabbeinu went back up. And we commemorate this day of Yom Kippur as the holiest day of the year, as a day of atonement, every single year. So it actually makes sense that the first day in which this process began should be commemorated. It actually makes sense. Rosh Chodesh Elul. Rosh Chodesh Elul is a big day. We didn't get the good news. We got kind of the good news. Moses got the call. God said, Alei Elai Hahara. Come up the mountain to me. I think he kind of knew this was going to be good. God did tell him, bring blank stones with you. So you broke the old ones. hew out new ones. Moshe hewed out these new slabs. He's going up with these new slabs. I mean, it's probably going to be good news. Till you hear the good news, okay, you're waiting with bated breath. But it was going to be good news. So this was a very joyous day, actually. Rosh Chodesh Elul was historically a joyous day for the Jewish people. And how did they commemorate it? Well, they did the same thing that was done on the day that Moses went up. How did they announce Moses is going up the mountain? Tekiah, they blew the shofar. We blow the shofar too. Very nice. All right, so let's trace this now through Jewish history. Let's go through the parlance of the halacha until it gets to us in the Kitzur Shulchan Aruch. So the next place I looked was in the early codifications. The Gemara does not mention this. None of the Midrashim mention this. Pirkei Rabbi Eliezer is the sole source. But in the earliest halachic codification, it does show up. The oldest codification, the oldest place that I found, is in the writings of Rabbeinu Asher, also or known as the Rosh. Okay, Rabbeinu Asher, who rewrites the Gemara, restates the Gemara in code. I don't know if it's the earliest. I'm going to assume quote Maril. He might be older actually, but whatever. At any rate, the Rabbeinu Asher is found in the back of the Gemara, and he rewrote the Gemara in halachic parlance. So took out all the questions and answers, but he did add a fair bit of commentary. Of course, as we've mentioned many times in this series, the three pillars of Psak, of halacha, are Rosh, Rif, and Rambam. That's the three pillars of halacha. Rosh, Rif, Rambam. Rif, or the Alphas, is from North Africa. Rosh is a German transplant into Spain. And Rambam, of course, starts in Spain and ends up in Egypt. So it's 2/3 Sephardic. The Rosh says like this, and I'm quoting now. B'Rosh Chodesh Elul, on the first day of Elul, Amar HaKadosh Baruch Hu Moshe, God said to Moshe, Alei Alai Hahara. The Rosh, by the way, notes that he's quoting the 46th chapter of Pirkei Rabbi Eliezer. Ve'aviru shofar b'chol ha'machane. A shofar was sounded throughout the camp. The shofar sounds reverberated through the camp. And Shaharei Moshe Olo. Moshe is going up. And Moshe is going to be out of commission. There's no cell phone reception there. They're not going to be able to get a hold of him. He can't answer any emails. Okay, lo yitu eid b'aveidah zara. We don't want the people to make the same mistake again. V'HaKadosh Baruch Hu nis'ala be'osa shofar. That same shofar blast caused, so to speak, God to elevate, whatever that means. As it says, Olo l'kim b'sruah. Now, the Rosh says, V'lachein iskinu chachamim shiyutoken shofar. That's why the chachamim ordained that the shofar should be blown b'Rosh Chodesh Elul b'chol shana. And he says something which we didn't find in Pirkei Rabbi Eliezer. This is not merely a commemoration of an event that took place on Rosh Chodesh Elul, a happy day, a joyous day, a day in which God is going to be forgiving the Jewish people. But he adds now something which does not show up in Pirkei Rabbi Eliezer. And he says, do you know why they ordained that this should be blown b'Rosh Chodesh Elul b'chol shana v'shana? He says, the Rosh kedei lahazir es Yisrael, to warn the Jewish people, sheyashuvu b'tshuva, that they should do tshuva. So the first time they blew the shofar was so that they wouldn't do any averis. But now it's so they should do tshuva. Shenemar, why would you think that blowing a shofar is going to make you do tshuva? Well, we just read that verse in Amos, right? If a shofar will be blown, and then the Rosh says something else. Who expropriates the mitzvah of Rosh Hashanah? That's like, who gave you the right to do that? It's going to make you do tshuva. Of course it's going to make you do tshuva. That's what the Torah told us to do it on Rosh Hashanah. We don't do it in the month of Av, even though Kol Yom is supposed to be b'tshuva. You'll never find a Jewish community where they blow the shofar all year long. So he says, Ukadei la'arvev es ha-satan, to confuse the Satan. Shlei lahastan al Yisrael, so that he should not place obstacles for the prayers of the Jewish people. In other words, it seems to be something to the effect of like this. When the Satan hears the shofar getting blown on El, he says, did I miss it? Was it Rosh Hashanah already? And then he's all confused. They keep blowing, they're blowing and blowing. How long are they having Rosh Hashanah for? What's going on over here? Day after day after day. I know you look skeptical. I'm going to talk. We're going to have another class in this series on the business of la'arv es hasatan, on the confusion of the satan. Because we're going to talk about the fact that we don't blow the shofar in order to confuse the satan, what exactly that means. So, patience, my dear friend. I'm not talking about that tonight. Then the Rosh adds the following words. This is how he concludes. V'chein nohagu ba'Ashkenaz. This is the custom in Germany. Now remember, Ashkenaz is Germany, Alsace-Lorraine.
Old Frankish kingdom.
Yeah, the old Frankish kingdom, France, and many areas around it. So, Eastern Europe, one could say. But of course, the Rosh grew up in Eastern Europe, and he was the son-in-law of Rabbeinu Meir of Rottenburg, Maram Rottenburg, who was the uncontested leader of Ashkenazic Jewry. And they were both trying to escape Eastern Europe when they got caught. And Maram Rottenburg ends up in prison for the rest of his life for the sin of being a rabbi. And Rabbeinu Asher does escape, and he reestablishes himself with a great yeshiva in Spain, which at that time Jews enjoyed tremendous freedom. So he says this was the custom in Ashkenaz. Litkoa kol chodesh elul boker ve'erev. To blow the shofar all month. We never heard that before.
Boker ve'erev, twice a day.
Yeah, he says twice a day.
But then why don't we do it twice?
That's a good question. We'll get to that soon. But the Rosh seems to have changed things. The Rosh says, till now, when we look in the Pirkei Rebbe Eliezer, and even when the Rosh was quoting the Pirkei Rebbe Eliezer, this was warn the people, it's time to do tshuva. Because in 40 days from now is Yom Kippur. In 30 days from now is Rosh Hashanah. Warn the people to do tshuva. When was the shofar getting blown? One day. Just Rosh Chodesh. Now the Rosh adds other words. He says, therefore we blow the shofar every day of Elul. Every day. He says morning and night too, but he says every day of Elul. So something here has kind of shifted.
But that's Tiknu Chachamim.
Yeah.
Chachamim, I think he's referring not to the people way back 3,000 years ago, but rather I think he's referring to people between 1,500 and 2,000.
We could argue that. You could say that. You could say that if it would be earlier, it would say Tiknu Nevi'im. It could be. But the point is that the Rosh tells us that this is something that was done a whole month of Elul. Why is it being done a whole month of Elul? It's not being done to wake up the people for tshuva. From the Rosh, it sounds like it's being done to create obfuscation for the Satan.
Or to create, well, we can look at it negatively or we can look at it
But that's what he
positively.
says, because he says it's you blow it at the beginning of the month to tell the people to do tshuva, and then he says ukadei la'arv es satan, and then he says v'chein noagu, and this is what they do in Ashkenaz, which tells us two things. First of all, he said v'chein noagu ba'Ashkenaz, and he was living when he wrote this where? In Spain, in Sfarad. So what were they doing in Sfarad?
Not doing it.
They weren't doing this. So Ashkenaz was doing it. It doesn't say they weren't blowing the shofar on Rosh Chodesh Elul. It says they weren't blowing the shofar all month long.
Or they weren't blowing it twice.
Now, let me take you a little further. Back in the same book, in the back of the same Gemara, there is the halachas, as they are, the Gemara as it's restated in halachic parlance by the Rif, the Alphas. And the Alphas has a commentary called Rabbeinu Nisim, the Ran. So the Ran, at the very end of his commentary on the Rif, the Ran also evokes the same Pirkei Rebbe Eliezer. And he quotes the Pirkei Rebbe Eliezer. And he says, V'kach eskinu chachamim. And so this is what the sages ordained. Sheyiyu taken b'shofar b'Rosh Chodesh Elul b'chol shana v'shana, that they should blow the shofar on the first day of Elul every single year on an annual basis. K'dei lahazir es Yisrael sheyeshuva b'tshuva. Tell the people to do tshuva. And he says, Ukadei la'arv es satan. So the Ran here seems to be having the same tradition as the Rosh.
He's compromising, actually.
He's not compromising. He says the same thing as the Rosh.
Well, he says both to awaken the people to do tshuva.
Rosh also
and
said. The Rosh also said both things.
Was
The
the
Rosh
Rif
said both
after
things.
the Rosh?
The Rif is the same time approximately.
Well,
I think it's a little bit before.
So that would mean that North Africa also had
It's not the Rif. I'm reading from the Ran. The
Oh.
Ran is commentary on the Rif.
Oh.
And then he says, the Ran was also in the land as far as, but he says, Umikan samchu ba'Ashkenaz. On this, the word somech means to lean, rely. Here, the sages of Ashkenaz relied litkoa b'chol chodesh Elul achrei atfila boker v'erev. Umikan, and it says from this, yesh lismog minag oso makomos. From this we could also understand the custom of another thing, and that is mashkimim ba'ashmeres meresh chodesh El, that people wake up early in the morning to say slichot on Rosh Chodesh El. What does that mean? How did he get from the shofar every day to prayers every day?
Rouses you to Shuvah, no?
There seems to be some kind of link between the shofar and between. But why would they just blow the shofar then? Well, if it's about the shofar, then blow the shofar. He says no, it's about the shofar, but they didn't blow the shofar. Instead, what they did was they said slichot. So now I'm going to take you forward to take a look at Maharil. Maharil is the earliest origin of formal Ashkenazic customs. Rabbeinu Yankov Mulin. Rabbeinu Yankov Mulin's words are also annotated by one of his great disciples, Rabbeinu Isaac Mitirna, and he quotes one of his teachers, Maharak, Rabbeinu Isaac Kunizil. And he says like this, Maharil simply states, Minig hu b'chol tfutzos. It's a custom in all of the widespread diaspora. He means the Eastern European diaspora, obviously, because that's who he represented and that's who he knew. La'atchuli b'tkiyat shofar mishen nichnas Elul, to begin the shofar blowing when Elul arrives. He doesn't speak about Rosh Chodesh Elul. He just says, it's customary all over the diaspora. You start blowing shofar when Elul arrives, which is shocking. What do you mean start blowing shofar when Elul arrives? It's like saying you start eating matzah on Purim. Start sitting in the sukkah in the middle of Elul. That's when you blow the shofar, he says. Now Maharak, who is the Rebbe of Rabbi Isaac Tirner, he says that the proper minig is to blow from Rosh Chodesh Elul, and you do that to confuse the Satan, and he doesn't know when the Day of Judgment is. And he says that's why we don't blow the shofar on Erev Rosh Hashanah, so that the Satan hears the shofar all month long, and then it stops, and he says, okay, finished, it's over. But then it's not. Then the next day is Rosh Hashanah. And he says something very interesting. He answers a question which many have had. He says, why don't we start reading the Torah all over again on Rosh Hashanah? Why is Simchas Torah at the end of Tishrei? You should start at the beginning of the year. Chumash Bereshis should be at the beginning of the year, but that's when Bereshis happened. Rosh Hashanah is creation. He says, do you know why? Do you know why we start the Torah at Bereshis at Simchas Torah? He says, Lo yichaven masai tchilas hashana v'liyad l'katek, as if to confuse the Satan, so you shouldn't know when to be mekatek. I know this bothers you. I told you you're going to get to it. Relax.
If you think about considering how all the Chagim take up, take up a lot of the Shabbatot in which it occurs, the Torah readings, in which the Torah readings occur. Of course, they occur on Shabbos. If that being the case, then it kind of makes sense they're putting on to the second day of Shmini Atzeret. It's the next best day.
You could argue that. Or you could argue that we should have been started reading Bereshis from the beginning. All the Yomim Tovim, instead we're reading with Avraham Avinu. That's not the story. On Rosh Hashanah, we should read the story of Bereshis. That's what had happened.
And of course, there's always the case of Hazinu falling low for 10 days.
Let's not go all over the place. But yes, you're right. Still, that's what the Marak says. Then, Mahari Segal has a whole discussion whether it's the first day Rosh Chodesh or second day Rosh Chodesh, which I'm not even going to get into. I don't want to confuse you. There's the opinion that says the first day Rosh Chodesh, second day Rosh Chodesh, and the problem is we need to have 30 days, or ultimately 40 days. And the problem is that Elul only has 29 days. So if we blow for 28 days of Elul, we still don't have 40 days of shofar blowing. So it makes a problem altogether. And with the idea of doing it for a month, but really it's not a month, it's only 28 days. Okay, we'll maybe touch on that a little bit later. And then he says like this. He says something which is I have never found anywhere else. Anywhere else. We all know Mishenichnas Av Mematim B'Simcha. Av comes, we minimize joy. We know Mishenichnas Adar Marbim B'Simcha. Here, Maharil says something which, again, to the best of my knowledge, is not found anywhere else. Kide Amrinan, as they say, and I guess he must have heard it somewhere. Mishenichnas Elul, when Elul comes, Marbim B'Tshuva. That's what Maharil says. Elul comes, we increase in tshuva. And he says we could see this from the fact that the verse in the end of Deuteronomy, U'mala Hashem Elokecha eslavavcha veslavav zarecha, God will circumcise your heart and the heart of your progeny, which is found towards the end of the Torah in Parshas Vayelech. Yeah, that he says over there is Rosh Tevis Elul. Es levavcha. The es levav is Rosh Tevis Elul. Says, you see, Elul is tshuva. And therefore, he says, token lahazir ulahazriz ha'am l'tshuva. We blow the shofar to shake up the people, wake them up, and egg them on, inspire them. They do tshuva. And he says, Mashal Melech, the metaphor would be a king who's coming to lay siege on a city. And the sentry is up there in the tower. And when he sees the armies of the invading king coming, what does he do? He sounds the horn, to tell everybody to take up their positions and guard the city. And says, so it is with us. So now, Maharil does not even talk about this business of Rosh Chodesh Elul. He ignores it altogether. He doesn't talk about the business of Moshe Rabbeinu going up the mountain. He says we start blowing the shofar from when Elul comes, because Elul is Marbin B'tshuva and shofar is Tshuva. Now I'm going to take you to the Torah. The Torah, of course, is the forerunner of the modern day code of Jewish law, the Shulchan Aruch. The Torah is the first one to set up a compilation of Jewish law in 4 major, shall we say, pillars. And one of them is called Orach Chaim, the way of life, path of life, daily life, holidays. And the Torah, in Siman Tov Kuf Pei Aleph, the Torah is the forerunner, written by Rabbeinu Yaakov Balaturim, is the forerunner of the Code of Jewish Law, which is written by Rabbi Yosef Karo. The Torah is the son of the Rosh. The grandson of Maharam Rottenberg, the great leader of Sephardic Jewry living in Spain, is a grandson of the Rebbe of Germany. Go figure. So the Torah is not really Minig Sfarad per se, because he was raised by a father who was a Yiddish-speaking German Jew.
I think it was called Yiddish or Taich.
Yiddish or Taich.
It's like
Yeah, it's probably Proto-Yiddish. Language changes.
Yeah.
That's the nature of language. We should look at the English looked like about 100 years ago. It's pretty funny. Right. So the Torah in Siman Tov Kuf Pei Aleph in chapter 581, the Torah starts off like this. Tanya, we learn Bepirkei Rabbi Eliezer. And he quotes the Pirkei Rabbi Eliezer. The Torah quote, just like his father Rosh did. And he goes through the whole thing. Alei alei ahara, sha'oz, Allah lekabel luchas achrenis. He modifies a little. He says, Moshe Rabbeinu went up to receive the final luchot. Of course, he went up with the blank luchot, but that they should be infused, written by God.
Do you have another verse maybe?
The Haviru Shofar, I don't know. I don't think so. I think he just tightened up the language here. The Haviru Shofar b'machane. He had the sound of the shofar gone through at the camp. It doesn't say he, but Haviru, they, the people. Moshe Allah Allahar. That's the message. Amber alert. Everybody heard the noise. What's going on? Moses went up the mountain. It's like when you press the stopwatch. Now you can press your stopwatches. Let's get this count right. Now. They shouldn't make a mistake after idolatry. Shofar. And God is elevated in the same shofar. Same language as the Pirkei Rabbi Eliezer. And so now the Torah says, listen to this. Therefore our sages ordained, you take him, cherished Elul b'chol shana v'shana v'chol hachodesh. The Torah puts it together. And every single Rosh Chodesh, Elul, and the whole month, the Torah fused them. And he says that this is Kedei lahazer Yisrael she'asu tshuva. Says the Jewish people should do tshuva. And here he quotes the pasuk, Kim Takar Shefer Be'er. Ukedei la'arva v'satan. He quotes both ideas that are brought down in the Rush. V'chein nohagim ba'Ashkenaz, and this is the custom in Germany, Alsace-Lorraine, Eastern Europe. Litkoa b'chol boker v'erev acharat tefillah. That's what the Torah says.
Very comprehensive.
Very comprehensive. And this is going to be, we're going to come back to the Torah soon. But now I want to introduce to you what seems to be the shocker of shockers. Okay, so the Beit Yosef, he read the Torah very well, right? He wrote a whole commentary in the Torah. There's the Torah, and the Beit Yosef made a house on it, a house of Yosef, which was built on the foundations of the Torah. And then he took his system and he rewrote it as codes, as concise codes. The Torah has all kinds of things in it. It's not a Shulchan Aruch, it's a Torah, right? It's got all kinds of medrash and different ideas and explanations. The Shulchan Aruch is just case halacha, straight, almost like Mishnah, right? But
That's Torah.
That's the difference between Torah and Shulchan Aruch. So listen to what the Beit Yosef writes. Same chapter 581. And I quote, Nogim lokum ba'ashmeiras loimer slichas v'tachnunim. It's customary to wake up early in the morning to say slichas. Rosh Chodesh Elul ve'elach. From Rosh Chodesh Elul onwards, ad Yom HaKippurim. By the way, the Tur, about 15 lines in, he says that there is a custom of waking up early in the morning. The Amar Rav Hai, he says, the Tur says, Rav Hai Gaon, who was a great leader of the Sephardic Jewish world, he said, it's minhag loimer tachnunim b'hanach asar yom. It's a minhag to say the slichas in the 10 days between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. And then he says, we heard that some people do it from Rosh Chodesh Elul. But that's kind of deep into chapter 581. The Shulchan Aruch begins chapter 581 without mentioning the shofar. In fact, he doesn't mention the shofar even once. He doesn't mention it. How do I know this? Because I'm not going to read the glosses of the Ramah. I'm just going to read the next. That's subsection 1. Noigim loko bashmeres. It's customary to get up in the morning from Rosh Chodesh Elul until Yom Kippur. And then 2 reads Noigim lisanos erev Rosh Chodesh. It's customary to fast erev Rosh Hashanah. The Ramah, Rabbeinu Moshe Isserlish, who was the great halachist, the Polish halachist, who was busy writing a Shulchan Aruch at the same time when the Shulchan Aruch was being written by Rabbi Yosef Karo in Tzfat. He was busy doing this in Krakow, in Poland. So, and then he found out Rabbi Yosef Karo got to the printing press first. And they were not exactly in communication. They weren't Facebook friends. He didn't know what he was doing. Right? So he didn't know what he was doing, and he said, OMG, he already printed a Shulchan Aruch. Right? So, in an amazing move, he said, why should I have a second Shulchan Aruch? And then we'll have an endless issues with Sephardim and Ashkenazim. He made it. He built a table. I'll put a tablecloth on. That's all he did. Well, the glosses of the Ramah are called the Mappa, the tablecloth. Says the Ramah, Uminag b'nei Ashkenaz eino kein. He starts off not by telling us what to do, by telling us what not to do. He says, we don't do that. That's kind of funny. What do we do? So presumably the next thing is that we say slichot in the week before Rosh Hashanah, which, by the way, we do. He eventually says that. But first he says, Minig b'nei Ashkenaz eini kein. The Ashkenazim don't do this. Ella, what do they do? Rosh Chodesh ve'elech, from Rosh Chodesh onward, maschilin l'tkoa, they begin to blow the shofar achat tefillah shachris. And there are even places, shetoken gam arves, they blow at night also. And then he says, and they get up early in the morning, but that's way down the pike. That's a week before Rosh Hashanah. What's going on over there? I mean, if for whatever reason the Shulchan Aruch decided not to talk about the shofar, and he's talking only about slichot, so then the Ramah should have said, Shulchan Aruch says, we get up for slichot from Rosh Chodesh Elul, and Ramah should say, we don't do that, we get up from Shabbos Slichos, which is either a week or 10 days before Rosh Hashanah, or less than a week, or 5 days before Rosh Hashanah. Instead, he says, we don't do that, we blow the shofar, some blow it at night even. Right, slichas. Yeah, we do slichas too, but we do slichas later on. What's going on over here? Why did Shulchan Aruch write it this way? Unfortunately, we don't have this chapter of Shulchan Aruch from the Alter Rebbe, but this chapter was lost. So let me take you back to the Tur. Listen to this. On the Tur, the Beis Yosef asks a question. He says, I don't understand the Tur. I don't understand, he says. Why did he bring these multiple verses here? He brought a verse that says, he brought this idea that he blew a shofar in the camp of Israel in order that they shouldn't sin. He said, okay, then what are you telling me the story with the shofar blowing and people getting nervous? How you talk a shofar? Why is he quoting Amos? What relevance is that, he says? He already brought a proof to the shofar in the desert. Why does it bring another proof from Yitaka Shofar Be'er, the pasuk, the verse of Amos, about a shofar being blown in the city and the people getting there? What do you bring that for? And he said, I'll tell you why. Because you could say, yes, it's true, Moses went up the mountain. How did he get the message out? They blew a shofar. They tell me that's the only way you can get a message out. What if they would have got a message out with word of mouth? What if it would have been tweet.
Would have taken several months.
Okay, there was no Twitter those days. But Moses had trumpets. It didn't have to be a shofar. You could have got the message out. You could have had tribe criers.
Baskol.
Oh, I don't know about a baskol. You can't make a baskol yourself. That has to come from a higher place.
It's Moshe.
Right? But you could have got the message out another way. Why did they blow the shofar? The shofar was the loudest, easy instrument available to them. It's a wind instrument. It's the easiest instrument available. So, and he says another thing. With regard to Moshe Rabbeinu, it says that it was about, they should prevent them from sinning. It says prevent them from sinning. It doesn't say anything about tshuva. So therefore he says, that's why, because one verse unlocks one area, but then locks another area. The other verse unlocks something else, while it leaves something else locked. And because therefore each verse contributes what the other verse doesn't, both of them together reach the conclusion that we should be blowing the shofar.
Two locks on one gate.
Two key for two locks on one gate, exactly. And that's how the gate gets opened. So he says, with both of these proofs, now we know why it should be the shofar. And he says the point is not just not to sin, the point is to do tshuva. But at the time of Moshe, they weren't doing tshuva, they did tshuva already. Now they were not sinning again. Moshe Rabbeinu said, okay, you guys did tshuva, please don't do this again. So he blow the shofar to make sure they don't go back to doing it again. So I found the Shalah, Rabbeinu Ishaya Horowitz, who wrote the Shnei Luchat HaBrit, he asked this question. He says, I don't understand what the Beit Yosef is talking about. And he says something very shocking. He says, Kushat HaBeit Yosef eini klum. This question is not a question. It's not a question, he says. Of course the Torah needed to have two different verses. There are two different ideas here. There's the idea that you blow the shofar on Rosh Chodesh. That's from Pirkei Rabbi Eliezer. There's the idea you blow the shofar a whole month of Elul. Two different ideas. What was the Beit Yosef asking? It's not a question, the Beit Yosef's question. He says two different concepts, two different verses, two different proofs. Why do you blow the shofar Rosh Chodesh Elul? To commemorate Jewish history. Why do you blow the shofar a whole month? To make people do tshuva. Incidentally, the attitude and approach of the Shalah, of the Shnei Luchat HaBrit, is also reflected in the words of the Levush, who was another great halachist who decided to rewrite the Shulchan Aruch in the image of the Torah, but his work did not get traction. In the end, it was the Beit Yosef's work, but it's still very important work, and especially because it's very explanatory. So, the Levush, in chapter 581, he says there are two things going on over here. It's a custom to blow the shofar on Rosh Chodesh, and Rosh Chodesh. That's the custom. And he says, Vahatam, and the reason that we blow the shofar on Rosh Chodesh is because this is the day that Moses went up the mountain, and when Moses went up the mountain, they blew the shofar. And we didn't want the Jewish people to make the same mistake. And now we're doing the same thing. We're blowing a shofar and say to people, stop sinning. Stop sinning, everybody. It's Elul. Enough of this crazy behavior. Summer is over. No more sins. Okay? And he says, L'chein anu taken. That's how we blow. It's like, okay, demarcation point. No more sinning from here onward. And then he says, there's another business. And the other business is blowing a shofar all month long. And that is not about stopping to sin. That, he says, is about the shofar causing tremors and trembling. And if you talk a shofar, you talk, and he says, and that's the reason. And he says, then there's a business of confusing the Satan. That's the reason we blow the shofar a whole month long. So the Shalah takes his cue from the Levush, and he says, two different ideas, two different psukim here. But here's a little problem. What do you think, the Beit Yosef didn't know this? Beit Yosef did ask the question. Beit Yosef did ask the question. My dear friends, the answer here is so elegant and exquisite. And I'm going to prove to you that I'm right, because I found later that Rebbe basically indicates this. But here's the point. Listen carefully. According to the Torah, the idea of blowing the shofar on Erev Rosh Chodesh and on the days of Elul are not mutually exclusive. They ultimately meld together to form a single entity. It's an entity that has multiple sources. It's a river being fed by multiple streams. There's this idea that the shofar was blown on Rosh Chodesh, and the shofar said, don't sin anymore. And there's this idea that the shofar makes people do tshuva. And therefore we blow the shofar from Rosh Chodesh onward. The Torah is not the first one to say this, because really, this is what the Maharil already says. Maharil simply said, "Minig b'chol tfutz Yisrael la'atchuli b'tkiat shofar mishenichnas Elul," to start blowing the shofar when Elul comes. If you want to confuse the Satan, you don't have to do it from Rosh Chodesh Elul. You can do it from a week before Elul also. A week before Rosh Hashanah, I mean. Do it 2 weeks before Rosh Hashanah. Why do you have to start a month before? Why do you have to start Rosh Chodesh before? And the Maharil says, that's the minhag. The minhag is we started from Rosh Chodesh onward. He doesn't talk about different ideas. He doesn't say it's a mitzvah to blow the shofar on Rosh Chodesh and a mitzvah to blow the shofar during the month. Look at the words of the Torah. The Torah says that the idea is token b'Rosh Chodesh Elul v'chol HaChodesh, on Rosh Chodesh and all month long. The Beit Yosef understood this. The Beit Yosef said, so why are you bringing 2 verses? If it's one idea in the end, 1 verse should do. And therefore he explained, because it's both verses that give it its full flavor, that give it its full body, the full body experience. And here is the point. What we can see from the story of Pirkei de Rabbi Eliezer is that the month of Elul is supposed to be special. When does Yom Kippur begin, if you will? When does the Yom Kippur season begin? Rosh Chodesh Elul. Therefore, what should you do from Rosh Chodesh Elul onward? Make a big deal out of it. Do tshuva. Okay, there's 2 ways we can do this. Some people took the cue from the shofar, and they said, okay, we're going to blow the shofar all month long. And the shofar is hayitaka shofar be'er. What did the other Jews living in Sfarad do? They said, we'll do slichos. So actually, the slichos of the Sephardic community is the shofar blowing of the Ashkenazic community. You understand?
That's interesting.
And I'll prove this to you because I was very curious. My grandfather was a Sephardic rabbi, but he's not alive anymore, and I was saying, I wonder what the Sephardic community does. I started to Google here and Google there, and I took a look in the Kaf HaChaim, and the Kaf HaChaim says that, the words of the Shulchan Aruch, he dismisses, he doesn't mention the shofar blowing at all. He says, Hanoagim kedivrei HaShulchan Aruch, yesh, some of them are noagim litkoa, in middle of slichas. So in the Sephardic world, those who adopted the Ashkenazic custom of blowing the shofar did it as a part of slichas. He says, Ba'amnon Yud Gimel Midas, when they say the 13 attributes which were given to Moshe Rabbeinu at Har Sinai amidst shofar blasts, when they say the 13 attributes, that's when they mention the idea of the slichot. How cool is that? So basically, what we see, the Shalah is not understanding the Beit Yosef right. The Beit Yosef knew exactly what he was talking about. The Shalah comes from the position of the Levush, that there are 2 ideas. There's an idea of blowing shofar on Rosh Chodesh, an idea of blowing it all month long. And you could take that from the Rishonim. You could go in that direction. But clearly the Beit Yosef understood the Torah to be saying otherwise. And therefore, once the Beit Yosef understood that, he said, our custom is we get up in the morning from Rosh Chodesh. The Ramah also learned the pshat like that. Therefore, he says, Minig b'nei Ashkenaz einoi kain. You are doing slicha from Rosh Chodesh. We don't do that. What do? We blow the shofar. In other words, the point is that the month of Elul has to be special. The month of Elul cannot be just another month in the year. And because it has to be special, we're going to do one of 2 things, both of which are done on Rosh Hashanah. Either we're going to do extra davening, or we're going to be sounding the shofar. Or both. And because the fact is that it is ancient in Jewish history, going back 3,331 years, that the shofar was blown as a sign of demarcation to get the process of the 40 days of El going, because that's the case, that's the reason that we're going to keep sounding the shofar. It actually makes sense. It also makes sense to say, well, we shouldn't be blowing the shofar. Maybe you want to blow it on the first day. You don't have to blow it at all. They blew the shofar. We could say slichas. It actually, the Sephardic position makes sense to say, we should blow a shofar on Rosh Hashanah, because that's what you do on Rosh Hashanah. So what should we do? Slichot. Do slichot. The truth is, we're not in disagreement. The Ashkenazic community doesn't disagree with the Sephardic community. We just don't want to do it all month. We just get up for 10 days before instead of doing it for 30 days before. As to the question, in that case, why don't we blow the shofar for 40 days? The answer that's given is to confuse the Satan. Which you don't like, I know. We're going to get to that. And this, my dear friends, this all comes together in such a beautiful way. So now you understand that the idea of blowing the shofar is all about making Elul special. Making Elul special. These should be Elul-vating days. And the only way they could be Elul-vating is if we do something which is really unique and special and different. We say slichot numerous times during the year. Every time we have a public fast, we say slichot. But we never blow shofar. We only blow shofar in Elul. Incidentally, there's a big machlokes in the Rishonim if you start from the first day or the second day, and the custom of Chabad is to try to cover all bases. You blow privately to practice on the first day of Rosh Chodesh, and you blow publicly on the second day. This year it's Shabbos, so it won't make a difference anyway. Everybody will be starting for the second day. And now, just to prove to you that I'm 100% certain in my theory about this, first of all, just to show you that there is this different schools of thought of maybe blowing only on Rosh Chodesh, because we didn't really see anywhere, here is a quote from the Bali HaTosfos in its commentary on Parshas Eikev in last week's Torah portion. And it says that because that on that day when Moshe Rabbeinu went up the mountain, they blew the shofar on that day. And he says, on the 30th day of Av, which was going to be Rosh Chodesh Elul, Tiku shofar kadei shaloi titu b'yiridase. They shouldn't make the mistake with him coming down. K'mosha asisim b'rishaynu, like you did originally. V'zecher ledavar anu token b'yom Rosh Chodesh Elul. Now, the Das Zekanim, the Bali HaTosfos, were living in France, and they indicate that the reason we blow it on Rosh Chodesh was because that was a zecher ledavar. The Bali HaTosfos don't even mention blowing the shofar all month long. This is the approach of the Torah. Of the Levush, that is a blowing of shofar Rosh Chodesh, a zecher ledavar, and then a blowing of the shofar all year long, which is actually how it shows up in the Pirkei de Rabbi Eliezer originally. But clearly, the Torah takes a different path, and the Torah's path ultimately, he says, the shofar of Rosh Hashanah leads us directly from Elul into Rosh Hashanah. They're not mutually exclusive; they're not separate things. It's all one long continuum. So, what is the message? What is the message of the shofar? The Rambam famously says in Hilchos Tshuva and Perek Gimel that the message of the shofar is wake up, sleepyheads. Wake up, shake off the dust. It's time to realize that life is passing you by and you're not doing anything meaningful with it. So the Shalah says something amazing. I want to share this with you. And then I want to share with you something beautiful from the Rebbe. And with this we'll conclude. The Shalah says there is physical malaise and death, and there's spiritual malaise and death. It says there are three states a person could be in. You could be healthy, you could be sick, you could be dead. Three states. He says the same thing with your neshama. And he says this is what the three sounds of the shofar, the ringtones of the shofar represent. He says the first ringtone is a nice long sound. He says that's perfect. The first ringtone of the nice long sound, this is Elikim Asa Asa Adam Yashar. God made a person upright. Straightforward. We were not created convoluted. When did we get convoluted? We grew up. We got convoluted. And that's, he says, the Brias HaNefesh can only be maintained, just like physical health has to be maintained through physical health. Spiritual health can only be maintained with a proper diet of spirituality. He says that's through fulfillment of Torah mitzvahs and being a refined individual. What's the opposite of that? Well, this is going the other path. And therefore what happens? You get sick. He says the sick represents the shvarim. You're choking, right? And he says then, if you get really, really, really sick, what happens eventually? The body's so weakened you die. He says, what happens when people die? People cry. Say, oh, yeah. They weep, the wailing over you. He says, the wailing of the Truah. This is the wailing over the... He says, because we know there's a concept of a soul which can have chorus and die. And he says, the Truah is the Yalalu B'chia, just like you're crying over the dead.
Well, wouldn't the crying be more like shvar because of the sobbing?
No, the crying of the sobbing is when a person's really in bad shape. And then the Yalala, the fast crying afterwards, is when it's past tense. So he says this is the sounds of the shofar. The opening sound of the shofar reminds you were created pristine, nice, cute, sweet. Everything was great. There's this meme on Facebook where there's a black little boy and a white little boy, and they're wearing the same clothes. And they wear the same clothes so that the teachers would mix them up. Why should they know the difference between black and white? They didn't know the difference. What's the difference what color your skin is? The two boys came wearing the same clothes. They were sure the teacher would not be able to tell them apart. God made us upright, sweet, nice people. We had no biases. We had no bigotries. Everybody was fine. There's no issues. Then we grew up. Or we were influenced in a negative way. So we got sick. And what happens then? We get sick, and eventually you get all twisted. And that goes from the shofar, the first blast, there's no twisting at all. And then you go through into the shvarim, and then eventually that takes you into the truah. He says the good news. The famous medrash that says they ask wisdom, what should happen to the sinner? He says, the sinner? You blew it, you're dead. Move on. What are you going to do? I killed somebody. What, are you going to bring back to life? That's it. It's over. They asked prophecy, I don't know. It came to Torah. Torah said, well, if it was by accident, you can bring a korban. I said, okay, what if it wasn't? I don't know, I have no advice for you. And then they came to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu said, oh, do tshuva. Do tshuva, and then you'll be healed. In other words, he says, this is the sound of the shofar is how God made us, how we made ourselves sick, how we eventually killed off spirituality, but with tshuva, we can find full rehabilitation. That's the tkiya, shvarim, truah, and we finish off with the tkiya at the end. And the Shalah writes, he says like this, he says, when they blow the shofar on Rosh Chodesh, you have to think about stop sinning. And when they blow the shofar a whole month, you have to think about doing tshuva. So he actually divides the two things, because the Shalah learns it as two different things, like the Levush does.
What will we do this year?
What will we do? We'll do tshuva together.
On Shabbos we're not supposed to.
We anyway don't start blowing till the second day. So the Rebbe says that there is a direct link between the shofar of Elul and the shofar of Rosh Hashanah, and the Rebbe incorporates the entirety of Elul. The Rebbe does not divide the shofar into two shofar sounds. There isn't a shofar sound of Rosh Chodesh and a shofar sound of Elul. The Rebbe says it's one thing. This is a chiddush, a novelty from the Rebbe. The Rebbe says our custom is we blow tkiya, shvarim, truah. That's 4. Then tkiya, shvarim, tkiya. That's another 3, 7. And then another 3. Tkiya, truah, tkiya. How many sounds do we have altogether? 10. How many soul powers do we have? 10. The Rebbe says the idea, Eser Keiches HaNefesh, 10 soul powers. Chachma, Bina, Das, Chesed, Gvura, Netzach, Chayid, Yisayid, Teferes, Malchus. Pardon me. Chesed, Gvura, Teferes, Netzach, Chayid, Yisayid, Malchus. So the point that Rebbe says is that we have to do tshuva on all levels. All of us has to do tshuva. And the Rebbe says, and then he gets to Rosh Hashanah. How many sounds do belong on Rosh Hashanah? Not 10, but 100. Because really, each of the 10 is comprised of 10. 10 times 10 is 100. On Rosh Hashanah, everything has to be very precise. So now in Elul, it's just a general tshuva. And then we get to Rosh Hashanah, and then we have all the details in place. But the Rebbe says what starts in Elul culminates in Rosh Hashanah. The Rebbe doesn't divide between Rosh Chodesh, stop sinning and do tshuva. He says the shofar of Elul and the shofar of Rosh Hashanah are not mutually exclusive.
So now you're bringing in the Zohar.
One leads into the other. So we can see that this is the school of thought, which is the school of thought of the Torah, the two schools of thought of the Beit Yosef. It's about tshuva. That's what it's about. It's about tshuva. It's not stopping to sin. It's about tshuva. This is in Likutei Sichos Chelik Beis, on page 446. Then in Likutei Sichos Chelik Tes, there's a phenomenal sikha, which is, unfortunately, was too late for us to go through this whole thing. The Rebbe looks at the words of the Torah, and he analyzes. He says, why does the Torah say, "Ola Elikim Besrua Lachein Eskinu Chazal"? Ola Elikim Besrua, the pasuk which is quoted by the Pirkei Rabbi Eliezer, is actually speaking about Rosh Hashanah. Why is a Rosh Hashanah shofar inspiring the shofar that's being blown in the month of Elul? And the Rebbe answers because the Rosh Hashanah shofar and the Elul shofar are not mutually exclusive. And he explains, he goes in, he develops this idea of the 10 soul powers, and he takes the Rambam's idea and he identifies Malchias, Zechronos, and Shofros, the 3 themes of Rosh Hashanah. He identifies how in Elul, the Elul shofar blast leads us into the concepts of Malchias, Zechronos, and Shofros. Even in Elul, we have these ideas in microcosm so that they reach their full gamut, their full range on Rosh Hashanah. What is clear, unfortunately we don't have time to develop this. He's turning this into one continuum. And he brings copious proofs that it has to be so. It's all about tshuva. So the point is that in the month of Elul, we should be doing tshuva. And the interesting thing is that almost all Jewish communities today are sounding the shofar during the month of Elul. And everybody's doing it for the same reason. Tshuva.
Except they don't know.
Tshuva. So in the Sephardic communities where they're saying the concept of slichot, they're blowing the shofar along with slichot. It's kind of subsumed into slichot. And in the Ashkenazic communities, the shofar stands on its own, and it's the message of tshuva. Which brings us to a very interesting conclusion. So should the shofar only be blown at davening? And the answer is, why? The Pesach Tzvi Frank writes that since the idea of tshuva is tshuva on the month of Elul, he says that you have to make some kind of official thing, otherwise nobody would get to blow the shofar. He said, blow the shofar. Who, when, what? Not everybody knows how to blow the shofar. He said, okay, if people come in the morning davening, that's when you do it. But nonetheless, that he says you should blow the shofar anytime. If a person daven without a minyan, he should still blow the shofar. And in fact, the Nitei Gavriel brings down other Shaylos Teshuvos where it says clearly that when somebody davens on his own, they should still blow the shofar, and he brings a proof. What if you don't have a minyan to say slichot? What if you're the only Sephardic Jew in the Ashkenazic community, and everybody's blowing shofar and nobody's getting up early? What should you do? You should get up and say without Yud Gimel Midas or Rachman, without certain portions of it, but you should say slichot yourself. Why? Because the point is that we should all individually prepare. So the shofar sounding prepares us for Rosh Hashanah. That's the point. And very interestingly, there was times the Rebbe davened for many, many hours on his own, and he used to blow the shofar at the conclusion by himself also. And therefore, it makes perfect sense that we should be blowing the shofar if you're davening on your own after davening, but as in a broader sense, it makes perfect sense we should be blowing the shofar whenever Jewish people come together, because what does this do? It helps us do tshuva. And since helping us do tshuva is more important than taking the shofar and reserving it for Rosh Hashanah, because since it has such a powerful message, which is beyond the mitzvah of shofar blasts of Rosh Hashanah, like we see in the book of Amos, Hayitaka shofar be'ir v'lo yechrat, and because ululating Bisrua is the culmination, the climax of all the days of Elul that lead us into Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur, so by blowing this shofar during the month of Elul, we become inspired and elevated, and we do tshuva, and hopefully when we have the proper preparation during the month of Elul, and we do tshuva as we're supposed to, and we heed the sound of the shofar, then Emir Hashem will merit that should be a Shana Tova U'Mesuka, a beautiful, happy, sweet year, and the great shofar will sound, bringing us all home to Yerushalayim at the coming of Mashiach B'mheira will be Amenu. Amen.
Rabbi, why don't we say it in the evening?